This program is brought to you by Jizzy.
برعاية كوندور.
Condor, prenez votre envol.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special coverage of the second day of the BRICS 15th Summit. Today we're very honored to receive Chief Mandela here in our studios in Johannesburg. Mr. Mandela, thank you for being with us. We're very honored to have you.
It's an honor and privilege to be here with fellow Algerians from Al24.
It's a pleasure. Mr. Mandela, shall we start with the Algerian and South African relationship? How do you think it can be evaluated and how do you think it can be developed?
Well, this is a relationship that was founded and started in 1962 when my grandfather went for his military training in Algeria with Robert Risher. My grandfather has always spoken highly of his experience there in Algeria, particularly being around the likes of President Ben Bella, Boudieff, Pitat, and Boumediene. But for us as South Africans, we'll always remember the speech that President Boumediene made while he was in the United Nations, declaring apartheid to be a crime against humanity. That really gave a boost and a contribution to our struggle for liberation. And the contribution that Algeria has played during our darkest days in history can never be forgotten. My grandfather always used to say that Algeria was and is and continues to be his second home. And this is why we as the family will always regard Algeria to be our second home. But most importantly, he said that Algeria made him a man. He was able to, like many other revolutionaries in Africa, who regarded Algeria as the land of revolutionaries. We always sought assistance and support from the Algerians. But when he was released and became president in 1994, his comrade and friend, who was an interpreter for him in 1962, Comrade Judy, actually became the first ambassador to South Africa for Algeria. And I had the privilege and honor to meet Comrade Judy when I was in Algeria in 2018 and learned about my grandfather's visit to Algeria. But it was also then that we asked the question as to how we can be able as South Africa and Algeria to strengthen our bilateral ties.
Indeed.
And I think it was from that the Algerian government felt they needed to do more in preserving Madiba's legacy, and that culminated in the stadium that was built and honored in honor of my grandfather, President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. And I attended the opening and the closing of that early this year. But today here we meet in the BRICS Summit, the 15th BRICS Summit in South Africa, which we are hosting. And we have also achieved some milestones. Indeed. Because we had the inaugural flight from Algeria, from Algiers to Johannesburg, therefore linking the two strategic areas in the north as well as in the south. And it is a beginning of greater, more achievements to come, because this route will be able to unlock many opportunities both for Algeria and South Africa. And we believe that there's a lot more we are waiting to see, particularly in this BRICS Summit. You know, Algeria has applied to be part of the BRICS countries. And we are also looking to see as to what will be the pronouncement in terms of the countries that will be admitted to the BRICS band.
And this will be at the end of the BRICS Summit. Mr. Mandela, we are in Johannesburg, exactly at the International Convention Center, where the BRICS Summit is being held at, of course. How do you evaluate this specific edition, the 15th edition of the BRICS Summit?
Well, this 15th BRICS Summit has to be about Africa. It has to be about the rebirth and awakening of Africa. And South Africa is a strategic area for Africa, as many countries have always looked to South Africa as an entry point into Africa. But you would have also seen that His Excellency President Ramaphosa has also emphasized that even though South Africa may be the heartbeat of BRICS, it continues to ensure that Africa is positioned and
Indeed.
placed well
Indeed.
within the BRICS countries. And I think for many developing nations and oppressed nations around the world, BRICS continues to be the alternative where they can be able to look to as the new multipolar power rising to assist in combating their own challenges that they face as developing nations.
President Ramaphosa said that South Africa is at the heart of the BRICS. How do you see, Mr. Mandela, the relationship between Africa and BRICS?
Well, I think first and foremost, South Africa is strategically placed in BRICS as one of the 5 countries within BRICS. But in all efforts, South Africa has to ensure that it is also advocating for issues of the region, being SADC, and the other regions of the continent, but also advocate some of the priorities that are being pursued by the African Union. We must be able to come as a collective, as the entire African continent, to ensure that we are able to campaign as a bloc. It is only when we come as a collective we can amount to the same population as India, as China. And therefore we need those numbers in ensuring that as an African bloc we are able to table our issues. And I was very happy yesterday during the business forum to see that one of the critical priorities in Africa, being agriculture, was being prioritized, and it dominated a lot of the discussions within the BRICS Business Forum. And therefore, Africa has to ensure that it utilizes this as its own bargaining tool within the BRICS Summit. And you would have seen President Ramaphosa also rallying up a number of African countries, particularly in trying to see how we can be able to quell and bring stability within the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
We will get to this conflict, and we will get to this awakening that Africa is leading in the global system. But before that, how do you see the participation of the Sahrawi delegation and President Ibrahim Ghali in this summit?
Well, for us as South Africa, we have always enjoyed great relationships with our comrades and brothers and sisters in arms in the Polisario front. You would remember that Polisario stood with us in the trenches while we were living under oppression. They were able to rescue in a sanction-busting move. They confiscated almost about 45 tanks that were coming from South Africa, destined for apartheid Israel, which were procured by Morocco. And in this regard, South Africa has always held Polisario front to high regard. And we've always kept close relationship with the Sahrawi Republic. On numerous occasions, we have been able to host His Excellency President Ghali in South Africa and given him the privileges of having a state visit. And it is also important to note that as Africans, while we speak of decolonizing Africa, we cannot forget the last colony in Africa that is occupied by a member state. And this is what South Africa's commitment is in an attempt of ensuring that we are able to decolonize the continent and we are able to silence the guns on the African continent. And therefore it was highly applauded to see that the Sahrawi Republic and Western Sahara leadership was invited to attend the 15th BRICS Summit.
Getting back to the first day of this BRICS Summit, we have followed many declarations and many speeches from the president, or the Chinese president and the Russian president, and they both said that the world is at crossroads and they both called for overcoming conflicts. So the question is, how do you think BRICS can enhance collective action as an organization of course, in overcoming these differences and conflicts in the whole world?
Well, we have been closely looking and monitoring the shift in the geopolitics globally. And it is worth noting that developing nations have been at the receiving end, where they've been trying to move away and shift from the Western imperialist regimes. They have lived often under oppression, under occupation, and have always sought to find an alternative in order to ensure that they are able to develop their own nations. And therefore, with the challenges that they've witnessed in the international institutions such as the United Nations, as well as the financial institutions like IMF, as well as the World Bank, they've always sought to find an alternative that will be more understanding of the challenges that developing nations are experiencing. And with the BRICS formation, it enabled many developing nations to see as to how we can build on South-South relations and how we can be able to come together as developing nations to address our own challenges. And I think strategically in the group, having Russia and China that have always looked into building a multipolar universe where each country will be able to preserve its own sovereignty, to develop its own society without any interferences from other forces. And we have witnessed from President Putin of Russia yesterday saying that as Russia, they were ready to give full support to African countries and to assist in providing grain to those African countries. But I think what was remarkable was the speech from His Excellency President Xi Jinping of China, when he said that many of countries have sought to assert themselves and seek equal development of their own nations. And China is ready to support any country in upholding its own sovereignty, but also in looking at how to bring about modernization and development in those countries.
Okay, still with the speech of the Chinese president, don't you think that President Xi has blamed this year the West for all the crises in the world?
Well, we cannot shy away from that. If we speak from an African point of view, all of the problems in Africa have been the result of colonialism, have been the result of occupation, have been the result of brutal oppression. So us as South Africa, we underwent 60 years of a brutal apartheid regime. And therefore, he's correct to say that many of the problems we face today are a result of the Western imperialist regime. We today have been raped of our own human resources. Our people were taken as slaves to build the first world countries you have today, are a result of our own sweat, blood, and deaths of our people, who many of them died in the oceans. But also, if you look at the role of the occupied forces that came as settler colonialists into our land, and how they were able to rape us of our resources. Our minerals is what has built the first world countries that you see today. So that statement is not misplaced. It is placed with a true intent of us, if we are to enter into this dialogue, we must be able to address the social ills of the past.
And also, President Putin yesterday focused on the role of the BRICS in securing the food basket in the world and promised to give Russian wheat for free for African countries. Does the Russian president with this statement reassure Africa, which places the issue of achieving food security on its priorities? And do you think that Russia and BRICS members can achieve food security, especially in the countries of the South?
Well, for us, we must come to the realization that Africa as a continent holds 65% of arable lands and fertile lands on the globe. And therefore, we need to see as to how we can utilize that to first and foremost create jobs for the masses of young people in our continent, as Africa is a continent of youth. President Ramaphosa spoke yesterday, alluded that some 400 million young people are waiting jobs on the African continent. But also in President Putin's commitment was to say that how do we utilize agriculture as a means of alleviating poverty on the African continent. You have many homes that are child-headed households, but also women-headed households. And we need to find a solution as to how we best address those challenges that are faced by youths and are faced by women in particular on the African continent. And with agriculture being the focus, we can be able to ensure that young people and women in particular are prioritized in order to ensure that they are able to utilize their household garden to feed themselves first and foremost, but the surplus that they produce, they can also be able to sell into the market.
Mr. Mandela, many countries today seek economic freedom, especially countries from the South. They're seeking freedom from the countries of the North. Don't you think that today we're witnessing, and you mentioned a very important word before, that's an awakening. Are we witnessing today an awakening from new elites that seek to stop this dominance from the West, and that's the dominance that is on the African potential and African resources as well?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at how we have now shifted the focus from the financial institutions like IMF and the World Bank, and with the BRICS Bank coming up, and with the new development bank, there's now been an emphasis as to how do we ensure that we support our own programs and ensure that developed nations are not charged high interest rates that they can't even be able to maintain. But also what is of importance has been the discussion in and around coming up with a BRICS currency. Many countries today are tired of utilizing the dollar to trade. I can give you a classical example. If we, as South Africa, have to trade with another member state in the SADC region, and we take Zambia, for example, we must trade in a dollar. Why are we not trading in our own currencies to ensure that we are able to bring stability within our own currencies, but also to ensure that we develop ourselves? And I think through the establishment of a BRICS currency and also utilizing of our own currencies, we will be able to have that economic emancipation. Do
you think the summit will end with the establishment of this new currency and go into the path of de-dollarization?
I think the summit is discussing those issues, but it may take another summit or two before we get there. We analyzing and looking into the current discussions, we think that the next summit in Russia, in Moscow, will be the one that comes up with firm, concrete results. I think this one is being utilized as a stepping stone to see what are the different opportunities that are there and how we can be able to rally together into putting the criteria and the conditions in place.
Does this mean that these countries, the BRICS countries and African countries as well, are leading an awakening from the dominance, from the colonization of the global system and globalization as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you can really see that many countries, particularly on the African continent and developing nations right across the South, are wanting to shift away from the problems of the dominance of Western countries, and therefore we are able today to ensure that we strive for our own sovereignty, for our own independence. And I think we are witnessing a shift in geopolitics today.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Mandela, for all this information. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. It's been a great and honor to be here with Al24, and I wish you the best in the rest of your stay in South Africa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, we get to the end of this special coverage. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
This program was brought to you by Jizzy.
برعاية كوندور. كوندور, prenez votre envol.